Hi, everybody. My name is Anette Birgersson, and I'm coming to you from Sweden. And sadly, this is a recording, so I won't be able to speak to the audience today, but I hope that we might meet some other day, some elsewhere. So I am a Swedish psychotherapist, and I have dedicated my whole work life to working with children and adolescents, mostly with harmful sexual behavior, but also with trauma. So those two are my main subjects and my main groups that I've been working with. And of course, when you work with children and adolescents, you also work a lot with parents and helping parents with their parenting skills. And then, since I believe in and we believe in working with the whole system that the child are in, we also work a lot with the social services, we work with teachers, and we work with residential staff and family homes and biological parents. So we believe that you have to work with the whole system to be able to actually help kids and adolescents. So I'm very happy that you, as teachers, working closely with children, will be able to take part this. And I hope that you will find it interesting and that the knowledge will help you meet these kids where they are, because that's something that I will talk a lot about. This is my email, and I'm also on Facebook. So if you like to know more about these subjects, check us out on either Total Team Training, and that is the one that is more, I post more English, not much Polish, sadly, but English material that I think you could use. Also new articles in the field and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to reach me, just email me or look me up on LinkedIn, because it's an easy way to get me if you want to ask questions or if you're curious where to find materials that you can work with the kids. Okay, so let's go. We need to talk about this, and we need to talk about kids and adolescents with sexual harmful behavior, because lots of the sexual abuse that goes on in all over the world, and the numbers are pretty similar. It doesn't really matter if the study are from Europe or if it's from Asia, or like the most of the studies are from Canada and the US. If you look around and if you read the different studies, they all say about the same. So about 30 to 50% of all sexual abuse is committed by young people, children and adolescents. And a lot of these offenses are not reported to the police, and simply because, I mean, we all have different ages where you are entering the legal system, and in most countries in Europe, it's about around 15, and things that happens before kids are 15 are not reported to police, so they are not in the statistics. I've been working with this for 25 years, and I would say that most of the kids I've been seeing have been 15 or younger. So I know that a lot of the kids that actually abuse others sexually are not in the system, which, you know, tells me that 30 to 50% of all sexual offenses might be a low number for how it actually is. We also know that if we can start to talk about this, if we can teach kids about boundaries, body rules, and private parts early, we know that we can prevent at least some of this happening. And we also know that we can help kids actually tell. So if someone do something to their private parts, it's easier for them to tell adults or tell the teachers or tell someone else if they know about this from when they're pretty small. So that is also one of the biggest reasons that we need to start to talk about this amongst ourselves, but also with the kids and the adolescents. Women and girls are responsible for about 5 to 10% of all sexual abuse, and I think many get surprised by that large number. But also there, when you look at If you look at rates of arrests and rates of actually being charged for sexual abuse, the numbers of women being charged and girls are very, very, very low. But we also can see that even if we have a larger number now that actually get reported to the police, very few of those girls and women actually get convicted of sexual abuse. But it's important to know that if you have a case where there actually is a girl that is accused of, it could also be a girl. This is not only something that boys do. It's more common with boys, and especially when it comes to the adolescents. But when you look to children with sexual and harmful behavior, both girls and boys are pretty much equally represented. So when you have small kids, you have pretty much the same amount of girls and boys that have sexual harmful behavior. But then when you walk into adolescence, it's mostly boys that are reported. And every 4 years in the Nordic countries, they do this really big study where they ask 18-year-olds about a bunch of questions about everything pretty much, but especially about sexual abuse. So both if they have been sexually abused, but also if they have sexually abused someone else. And what they have found out, and what these 18-year-olds self-report, is that around 5% of everybody say that they actually have abused someone else. They have done something coercive sexually towards someone else. And 1% of them are actually girls. So there again, we have this higher number that we don't really recognize, because I have been doing risk assessments for 25 years. And I think the amount of girls I've been seeing, it's still under 20, I would say. So we don't see these girls and we don't really know what happens to them. But it's important that if we have a girl, we need to also give her the treatment, and we need to help her to figure out, okay, so how do I use my sexuality in a way that is not coercive to someone else? When you look at who becomes a sex offender, an adult sex offender, I don't use the word offender when I talk about kids and adolescents, because I don't want to stigmatize. And we also know that most kids and adolescents that sexually abuse someone else, they won't do it again. The recidivism rate is very, very low, even if you don't get treatment, but even more if you get any kind of treatment. So, but there are a few that actually continues to abuse people sexually when they grow older, and about 54% of them, they report saying that, okay, I did my first offense when I was around 18 or under. So there are a few kids that actually start doing sexual offenses when they're in their teenage years and then continue up into adulthood. And most of those, when we look at that group, we know that they didn't get a risk assessment done. They didn't get any treatment, most of them. And most of them are also people that have a hypersexuality. That is when you are a very, very sexual person, your drive is very, very high. That is more common than actually being a pedophile, because being a pedophile that only wants to have sex with small children is not the biggest risk group, actually. We kind of a bit sloppy call everybody that have offended against a child a pedophile, but that's not really correct. What's a pedophile? It's just the adults that only wants to and only can get sexual aroused by small children that are prepubescent. So most kids, adolescents, and adults that abuse others and abuse kids are actually hypersexual, or there's some other reason. It's a few that are pedophiles. So it's really important, and we're going to talk more about that later, but it's important to remember that most kids that do sexual things to others that are coercive can't be compared to adults at all. So there are so many other reasons to why you do it, and it's not saying that they are going to be an adult sex offender. These are two totally different things, and we're going to talk about that, and I hope that at the end of these hours you will have a better view and a better idea of how this works and why. But it's important to know that we can't treat children and adolescents like we do with adults, and these two groups are totally different. We also know that a person that gets sexually abused by a child or an adolescent, they get harmed in the same way as they would have done if they got abused by an adult. So the trauma symptoms are not less severe because you have been abused by a child or an adolescent. So when we look at this in a broader term, it's super important both to help the kids and adolescents with sexual harmful behavior so that they don't do it again. But also we need to help these trauma victims, these victims of sexual abuse, so that they get the help they need, because otherwise we know that they also could have trouble with their sexuality later. And we also know that trauma and PTSD is one of it's a really big cause for all kinds of mental illnesses and even physical illnesses later in life if you don't get that treated. Okay, that was a very, very serious start to this. So jump to something that is a little bit more fun. So when you're talking about sexual harmful behavior, you also always have to talk about what is healthy sexuality, right? Because sexuality is something that we have with us since we're born. Even when a little baby is newborn and still can't do anything by themselves, the sensations and the function of the genitals are already there. The sexuality is there, and it's there because we are supposed to be sexual beings, because we're supposed to be able to create new humans. So this is something that starts as when we're really small, and then it changes over the years, and then when we hit puberty, and after puberty we are able to have sex so that we can get babies. So this is there from the start. So when you're little, you are super curious about everything. You want to know about everything that has to do with the body, and you're super curious, and you ask lots and lots and lots of questions. And for a really small child, there's no difference in asking questions about their penis or vagina than to ask a question about why does my stomach feel like there's like an ocean in it when I move after I've been drinking, or why do I have like holes in my nose, or why does it feel weird if I put my finger in my ear? Everything is just super curious, and they don't differentiate between private parts and other body parts. And that's also why it's it's a perfect time to start to talk to your child and children about body rules and body parts, because if they can recognize that there is something special with the private parts, which they will do pretty soon anyway, we can teach them what's okay and not okay. We can teach them boundaries around this, but boundaries that is not harmful to their sexual health, or that are judgmental, but that helps them in connection and relationships with other kids. But also mostly because then they can say, if someone does something to me that they're not allowed to do, I can say so. I have a language to actually speak out and say that, this person broke the body rules. They touched me in a way that I didn't like and I didn't think was okay. But only if I know that it's not okay, I can tell someone else. So then when you turn around 4 or 5, and all of you know that the developmental stages for children are different. So we can't say that 0 to 4 for everybody and then 4 to 5 with everybody, because this is very different from child to child, but around these ages. So around 4 to 5, you start to play more with each other. Before that, you kind of play with other kids, but you play more separately, like next to each other more. When you're 4 to 5, you start to actually have relationships with your friends, and you start to have mutual play, and you learn how to, take turns in play and speaking. And also you start to explore gender and gender roles. It's very common to play house. You play like you're a family, and you pretend you're your baby, and you pretend that you're the mom, and all of these games. And it's also pretty common that kids, are curious about, okay, so I look like this. How do you look? What do you have? I have a thing that is this way, and yours. I have this story I usually tell about. And when my kids were small, we lived on a street where everybody was in the same age. So everybody had kids that were between, I would say, 3 and the oldest might have been 10. So all of them were in very close age. And we usually sat, all of us, on, like, this was a little end street. So we sat outside on the sides, and all the kids played on the street, and parents were chatting and having their coffee. And then suddenly one day, 2 of the kids were just gone. No one could find them. So all the parents started to run around in the yards looking for these kids. And then when one dad came around a garage, he saw Tyra, 4, and Alice, that was 5, and they had their shorts down, and they were looking at each other's genitals, and they were like all red in their faces, and they were super giggly, and they thought it was so funny. And when the dad saw them and they noticed him, they fast pulled their pants up and then ran off and just played something else. It's a perfectly good example of natural play with small kids. You are the same age, you know each other really well, and this game and whatever they were doing, it's one thing out of 1,000 other interesting things they can do. So they played, but then when they got caught, they knew that it was a little special because they knew about private parts. So they got a little embarrassed, which is really good, because then they know, okay, so this is a kind of a little bit outside of what we're supposed to do. But then they run away and they do something else. They don't run around next corner and continue the game. They just continue doing something else, playing, on the street with playing soccer or whatever. So being this open is very normal when you're little. Being curious about the genitals is very normal when you're little. But then when you go into school age, so when you start school, in Sweden, we start school around 6. And that is a developmental age that really, when you have had small kids around this age, you know that there is a huge difference on a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old. It happens so much with them. They start to understand that they're, they are a person of their own. They start to express interest way clearer. They get more shy, usually around both their bodies, and a little bit more careful with strangers. They know that now I'm in my own person. I'm starting my own life when I start school. That is not with my parents, which I might not have been used to before, even if I was in kindergarten. It's in a totally different way. And now sexual behaviors like this, looking at each other's genitals or trying to kiss someone and all of that, those behaviors become way more secretive, because by now kids know that this is special. And it's still very normal. It's it's normal to, start saying that I am going with this person and I, write notes. Do you want to be my girlfriend or do you want to be my boyfriend? But it's still very, very innocent. But that gender play is very common around 6 and 7 and 8. But adults usually don't see as much of it as they did before. This is when some kids, especially kids with different neuropsychiatric disorders, have a hard time adapting to this new way of playing that their peers are doing, because they are a little bit behind developmentally. Even if they're not, even if their IQ is not affected, they could still have a difficult time, understanding relationships and boundaries. So often when you have kids with sexual harmful behavior, you need to also look into, okay, so is it because of, it could be trauma, but it could also be neuropsychiatric disorders. And it's not that kids with neuropsychiatric disorders are more likely to have sexual behavior problems. It's more that they don't know how to adapt their behavior. Like we also know that kids with autism, for example, has a difficult time in relationships with others. So we need to help these kids and teach them, okay, so how can we work around this? And how can you know when it's okay and when it's not okay? Super important. Then around 9 to 12, we are getting more and more studies about how, for example, pornography affects kids. When I was young, pornography was something that you heard of, and maybe someone found a magazine somewhere. I know behind my school, someone found a magazine in the woods, and that was very strange and very forbidden. But nowadays, kids there are studies saying that kids from 3 years old are daily on the internet. And the older kids get, the more time they spend on internet by themselves. And even if parents have, all these kinds of parental controls installed, it's very easy to, it's getting harder and harder, but it's still easy to at least get pictures of sexual content. If I searched the other day on Google for a picture, and if you scroll down on the pictures, even if I search on elephants or if I search on, I don't know, apples, if you go further down, there's almost always some sort of a sexual picture or a picture of a genitals or something hidden in these pictures. I think Google and all the other websites, they are getting better and better of noticing when these are around. It was worse a couple of years ago, but we know that kids are exposed way earlier, and we know that most kids report seeing their first pornographic picture or video when they're in between 9 to 12. And almost everybody reports that it's by mistake or that someone showed it to them. If some older kid or peer showed something to them. Kids start to search themselves for pornographic pictures or naked pictures when they're around 12 to 13. That's the normal age to have started searching for themselves. And there is an enormous amount of unprotected both pictures and videos out there that kids both can, come over by accident, but also if you search, you can find so much, and so much that is very inappropriate for small kids. It's hard to say that. Some countries have put in 18 years controls, but they still work around it, and it's still hard to prevent. And this means that we as an adults around these kids, we have a responsibility to start talking about this. You might see this online, you might come across this online, And it's so important for kids to understand that this is not reality. We need to teach them how this is filmmaking, just like they do these amazing action films where people can fly and they can jump from buildings without getting harmed, and they can do so many things that no one could do in real life, because then it would mean that we will die. If I jump off a building, I would definitely die. I would not just start flying or being able to jump super far to the next building. So we have a responsibility as adults to start to talk to children about this, so that they understand that this is not something that is normal sexuality. This is not how sex is in real life. This is fiction. Because we know, and we're starting to get more and more studies that say that pornography actually interfere with the normal, healthy sexual development, because it puts pressure on kids. It puts pressure on kids to try things that they don't want to try, and that they think that they have to try, and that they have to want to try. And we don't want that. So we have to talk about this in a big way. So puberty is also something that is very individual, but sometimes between 12 and 14 is the regular time to go into puberty. And then for some kids, puberty is super fast and it goes by like this. Or then for some kids, it lasts for a long couple of years. But that's when you start to mature. You are, starting your natural interest for sexuality comes along, and you start to want to try things yourself. You start to want to be together with someone else. You figure out your sexual identity, what you like, if you like boys or girls, or and this comes naturally, and it works in the same way as with kids. So what you do is that you explore for yourself, with yourself, and then you eventually start to explore with other kids. And this is all natural, but what we need to do here is also help kids to understand, okay, so what are the boundaries around this? What am I allowed to do? What are others allowed to do to me? And what is okay, and what is legal, and what is illegal, right? Because those things differentiate between different countries. In Sweden, you are allowed to have sex when you're 15. In some states in the United States, you're not allowed to have sex until you're 21. That's a huge difference. But we need to know, and if you are in Sweden, you need to know the Swedish rules. If you're in Poland, you need to learn the Polish rules, because this is super important, because otherwise you could do things that can get really, really severe consequences, and you probably didn't mean to, like sending nude pictures, or keeping nude pictures, or collecting nude pictures, for example, or even go over someone else's boundaries without understanding or without caring. And you need to know what those consequences are. If we don't teach kids this, how would they know? Because if they look at the porn, and if they look on the online, it looks like, you can do this with anyone. And everybody likes it. So we need to really have this in mind, that we need to educate kids, and we need to talk about this so that they know. And this way we won't stop all sexual abuse, because that I don't think that's possible. But we will help kids to at least sometimes maybe not do it, or sometimes at least being able to talk about it, or sometimes ask for help when they can't handle the situation they're in.
Welcome back, everyone. Okay, it's time to tackle the topic adults usually and needlessly find the most difficult: talking to young children about how babies are made.
You mean sex? Yikes. What if they want to try it?
I hear that worry a lot, Adele, but the truth is, children aren't at all interested in people having sex. All they want to know is how they were caused, or how they came into existence.
It's always about them, isn't it?
So are you saying they really just want to know how things happen? Like when they ask, how are babies made? It's the same as when they ask, why does the book fall when I let go of it?
Right. 6-year-olds are capable of understanding a very exciting new idea, the concept of cause and effect. They can understand, for example, that a book falling is an effect and that gravity is the cause, just like a baby forming is the effect of a tiny cell inside a male body called a sperm joining together with a tiny cell inside a female body called an egg, which is the cause.
I guess that wouldn't be so hard to say. It's just science. But what if my child asks how the sperm and the egg come together? Do I use words like penis and vagina? Well, they're just words, right? And that is how the sperm and egg usually meet, right?
Right, Francesca.
But these kids are only 6. What's wrong with cute little names like Vajayjay or Pee-Pee?
Well, it's all about unspoken messaging. When we use real or scientific names for all of our other body parts, elbows, shoulders, noses, but code words for our sexual and reproductive parts, we give the unintentional message that penises and vaginas are weird or unmentionable or second-class body parts.
Okay, then. It's that easy.
Not so fast, Francesca. I just know my little science genius is going to say, come on, Dad, now you're just making stuff up. There's no way you can get something from way inside one person's body to way inside another person's body.
Hey, relax, everybody. How about saying you just put your finger on a big problem? But nature fixed it by designing 2 particular body parts. Most men have a penis, and most women have a vagina. And they're able to fit right together just like, wait for it, puzzle pieces.
I never thought about it that way.
By using scientific terms, we can easily take kids through the logic of how new life is created. Today, though, there are many ways to make babies, aren't there? But with not one exception, every person who ever lived came from one sperm and one egg. How the 2 of them might get together, that's what's different today. And we can explain that in a matter-of-fact way to kids, too.
But what about us? We're gay dads. That won't work.
Well, your child was still created from a sperm and an egg, right? You can absolutely tell them that their egg also came from a female body, but met with a sperm in another way and then grew inside a woman's body just like all other babies.
They might even think it's more interesting that way. They'll probably say, cool, right before they ask, what's for lunch?
Best of all, by talking about science and explaining cause and effect, we're encouraging our kids to be curious and to keep asking questions. It's important for them to know we'll always be there for the next question, and the next, and the next.
I think we all know that kids will always have more questions.
They have a lot of cute videos, and I'm going to show one more later. But if you have kids, and usually kids, at least in Sweden, are pretty good at English, so we actually use quite a lot of English clips in treatment and in educational programs because they are usually very used to using English online, so it's usually not a problem for them. This particular little clip was for parents, and I think it's such a good. She presents it in a really good way, and it's a good discussion. And usually when you talk to small kids about this, it's nothing. It's not embarrassing. It's embarrassing for us adults because we connect this to something else. But for small kids, this is like you're describing how, eating food and then how what food does in the belly and then what poop and pee are. So it's not difficult. And also using the correct terms. I mean, you could have a family name, absolutely, but they also need to know the correct name for vagina and penis because that is important if they are going to tell someone about, someone broke the body rules, someone touched my vagina or someone touched my penis without me wanting it, then they need to be able to use words that other people understand because otherwise they risk not getting the help they need. So when you see or meet sexual behavior that you don't think is abusive or, developmentally strange in some way, openness, curiosity, and calmness is the best way to handle it. Just, okay, so what was that game you were doing? And did you like it? How was it? Whose idea was it? Do you have any questions after? Do you wonder anything? And also answer the questions like this in this parenting group. You don't have to explain the whole procedure of having sex. You can do it way easier and with way easier words that are developmentally appropriate for the age the kid is that are asking the questions. You don't have to describe everything. In your adult head, you maybe freak out a little bit because I can't describe how this works. And no, you don't have to. But the kids, as she say, they're not interested. They want to know the facts. And the facts are that these two, the egg and the sperm meet, and then that becomes a baby. They don't need to know the exact details of all the things that happens. So be clear, be open, try to make it fun, and try to make it easy to talk about, because you want your child to be able to come to you if they have questions. And then introduce the body rules and the private parts. Talk about that. I'm going to talk about that later and a little bit more in detail what that entails. And also, if you get to know that 2 kids or more kids have had any kind of sexual play, make sure that you ask and find out if all of them was in on this, if all of them found it, exciting and funny and wanted to try, wanted to look, because there could be also 1 or more kids that wasn't very interested and maybe felt very embarrassed or felt very awkward and didn't like it at all. And then you need to talk to them also about, okay, so how do you tell your friends if they suggest something that you don't want to be a part of this, and that's okay. Okay. So that's a little bit about the sexual development and the healthy sexual development. When you meet kids with sexual harmful behavior, you also need to talk about trauma. Because what we know is that a lot of these kids with sexual harmful behavior that we meet, especially if we are meeting kids within the system, within social services, or in residential care or in family home care, we need to know that a lot of them also carries trauma or trauma events with them, which can be so severe that they actually would classify as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or it's just, it's not just because developmental trauma is not just, but they are affected by trauma, maybe not as acute as a PTSD. So when you look at adolescent boys, which is the group that we have the most research on, of course, around 30% of them have been, and reports have been sexually abused. Quite a big portion, I think it's around 10% of them, say between 10 to 30% of those 30% say that they actually been sexually abused by a woman. So we have women here that we don't talk about. When you talk about the whole group of kids with sexual harmful behavior, you say in studies that there is a differentiation between 20 to 100% that has been through some sort of traumatic events, and usually more than one kind. So usually it's both sexual abuse, domestic violence or exposure to sexual violence in some way, neglect. So many of these kids have some sort of trauma history, has some sort of disrupted upbringing that absolutely disturbs them and maybe affect their behavior and how they feel, both how they feel mentally, but also how they feel physically and how they feel about themselves. When you talk about girls and small children, it's even higher. The number that has been sexually abused of the kids that actually have sexual harmful behavior is even higher. And it's hard to know if that is a true fact or if it's just because the kids we see and the girls and women we see are in a much worse state and has gotten further along in their, what do you say, like tragic, history. But when you have children and when you have girls and women with sexual harmful behavior, you should always also do a trauma assessment. And really, I think you should do it with all kids that have sexual harmful behavior, because the chance that they actually have trauma symptoms is really, really high. So if you turn it around, so if we look at the group that has been sexually abused, so the group of kids that has been sexually abused and then present with a sexual harmful behavior, that number is way lower. It's 10 to 30%. It's not as high. So if you look at the risk assessment tools we use when we risk assess kids with sexual harmful behavior, we can't say that having been sexually abused is a risk factor. But we know that kids, especially small kids that have been sexually abused, especially if they've been sexually abused in a close family over a long period of time, the risk of them developing any kind of sexual harmful behavior is higher. Because if you have a small child, even if it's by force and even if it's not something that they want to, because they can't even say yes, they don't even know what this is, right? But if they get used to being sexually stimulated when they're little, when the abuse, if the abuse stops, the risk of them trying to seek this sensation out on their own with other peers is higher. I hope that becomes clear. But it's not a risk factor. So we can't say that everybody that has been sexually abused will go and sexually abuse others. That correlation is not there. But we need to, when we have kids that have been sexually abused, we need to make sure that even if they're little, that we teach them again about body rules and boundaries around this, so that they know what is okay and not, because they have been taught that, this is okay, this is something you do. And usually older offenders, they are pretty good at making this into a game and playful, and they also want their victim to feel good during these sexual abuse events. So the child gets kind of tricked into thinking and feeling things that they haven't chosen themselves. But we need to help them sort that out so they understand it and so that they don't risk doing something with someone else. Okay, so now a little warning. I hope this works now, because sometimes the sound is not super good. But I would like you to do an exercise, and this is a little invasive. I think you are going to sit live, so hopefully this will work very well. I would like you all to stand up where you are. You're not going to move around much, so you can just stand where you are. And then you start jogging in place. So running in place. Good. Get your heartbeat up. That's the purpose. And I want you to do your count by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9. Also keep going. And then I want you to keep going until I stop the sound, and then you can sit down and close your eyes. Okay, here we go. Keep running and counting. Okay, now I want you to sit down and relax. and take a moment. If you feel comfortable with closing your eyes, close your eyes. If you're not comfortable with closing your eyes, look down on the floor just so you don't look at someone else. Take a moment and calm your breathing down. I'm guessing your pulse is high. Take a moment to think about where you feel your pulse. Is it in different parts of your body, or is it just in your fingertips or in your belly button or where your heart is? Sometimes people feel their pulse all the way down to their feet. Take a moment to think about how this exercise worked for you. Was it hard? Was it hard to count? Did it get harder to count the more you ran? How did you experience the sound? I think that the people recording here didn't hear the sound very well, so I hope that they can make this happen when we're doing the presentation for real, because they will have the picture, so they could probably make it loud for you. And then just take a deep breath and open your eyes. Okay, so let's take a moment with your partner or the person that sits next to you and talk about how this was for you. So I'll be quiet for just a little moment. Okay, so my guess is that it got harder the more you ran, and the higher pulse you had, it got harder to count. It became almost disturbing. I usually see some people like closing their eyes, try to make themselves smaller and close themselves in to make it easier to count, taking help with your fingers, and doing all these kinds of things to maybe just focus on the counting. For some people, the sound will be super intrusive, and the impulse, I'm guessing, is to scream at me to shut it off, or run out of the room, or hold your ears to be able to focus on the counting. And so why do you think I made you do this? Because this was pretty uncomfortable. I wanted you to do this because this is how many kids with trauma experience their everyday life. We know that kids and even adults with PTSD, they have a higher pulse level all the time. So if you're a runner or if you exercise frequently, you know that if you have 110 or 120 impulse, you're working. Your body is really up and going. This is when you're in a class or you're out running and you have a pretty high level of activity going on. So what you can see in research is that a person with PTSD have a resting pulse on 110 or 120, while regular people with no PTSD are somewhere between 50 and 70 usually. So that's quite a large difference. This means that your body is in constant stress mode. It's in constant survival mode, which makes everything harder. So the higher stress you are in, the higher pulse you have, the harder you have to do tasks like counting, thinking clearly, solving problems, managing conversations and relationship skills, and you even lose your fine motoric skills. I'm sure that people that have been running at some point know that if you have to stop to tie again your shoelaces, you most likely will have to do it again in a couple of meters because your fingers don't work really well. The fine motoric skills, they don't work when you're in high emotion and have a high pulse. So kids that have PTSD, they live in this higher stress mode the whole time. It's also very common to have intrusive voices and intrusive pictures and intrusive sound. And it's not voices like when we talk about diagnosis like schizophrenia, it's not voices usually that tells you what to do. It could be talking, just talking. For the people that are old like me, that knows what it was when you had a car radio, and when you ended up in between two channels on the car radio, and you couldn't really hear anything properly. You heard this sound, and then you heard a little bit of music from somewhere and a little bit of talking from somewhere. Many people describe that this is what they have in their brain the whole time. And the more the stress we put on top of the PTSD, the louder this gets and the lower function we have in doing everything. This is why some kids some days can work perfectly. They are perfect students. They come up, they make the bed, they are in time for school, everything works perfect. And then the next day they can't do anything. They can't get out of bed, they don't know how to dress, they don't know how to take the shower, they're late to school, they can't work in school. It's because their stress level are even higher those days, because that's connected to our vulnerabilities. So if we didn't sleep properly, if we didn't take our medications, if we didn't eat properly, if we didn't get to move, then our body kind of just screams that it's not taken care of, and then the symptoms is louder and higher, and it's way worse and way harder for these kids to actually do something. This works the same for adults. With PTSD, and you will probably see, if you have kids with PTSD, you will probably also get quite a few parents with PTSD, and then you need to work with both parents and kids around giving them psychoeducation around how the brain works when you have PTSD, all of these things that I've talked about now, how your brain is in constant survival mode and what that can lead to. And it can lead to a big variety of symptoms. So we talk about you having symptoms that affect your thoughts. It's usually that you have a really hard time concentrating, that maybe you have flashbacks where you relive traumatic events from before, or just very disturbing memory pictures that come up. It could be that you easily get trapped into scary thoughts, like, thinking that someone will come in and kill you, or thinking that someone will come and harm you. So you sit and you're really scared the whole time. But it could also be a lot of thoughts about thinking that you're worthless, that no one wants you. Why was I even born when no one takes care of me? That could be all kinds of things. Emotions, of course, anxiety, usually a lot of anxiety, and usually hyper attentive to everything that happens in a room. Many kids with PTSD, they know every detail that is in every room, and they know every detail that is anything about the people around. I'm sure if you worked in a school with these kids or in a residential with these kids, you know the kids that they know everything. They know exactly what staff is coming on at what time. They know exactly the schedule for everybody, because that's their way of controlling their symptoms. Because if they have at least control with that, the risk of them being surprised is less. And that means that they will be less scared, but also a way of controlling your anxiety. A lot of these kids have a lot of anxiety. A lot of these kids have depression, and there's a lot of other symptoms. Also, what happens is, you have this rapid heartbeat, you're tense, you use a lot of energy. So a lot of these kids are very, very tired all the time, because they probably don't sleep very well, and they probably, when their alarm system is going off the whole time, it craves a lot of energy from you. And then we have all the behaviors that comes with this. We have avoidance behaviors, that you don't want to do things. We have most of these kids have a really hard time relaxing. They're very restless. They really want to have the radio and the TV and the computer going at the same time, because quietness is dangerous and just makes them feel worse. Using drugs and alcohol is very common as a way to try to, cope with the anxiety. And then, of course, mood swings and behaviors like angry issues. A lot of kids end up, showing anger instead of anxiety, or anger instead of fear. And then it's not uncommon that kids with PTSD also have a lot of rituals going on. It almost looks like an OCD, like a compulsory behavior, but it's usually, the difference is that this is not usually connected with catastrophic thoughts. It's more to handle anxiety, to be able to, put yourself in this box and stay there, and not let all this anxiety and all the other issues and trauma symptoms you have leak out into everyday life. So this is something that you can look at, but there is also a lot of screening help, so self-tests that you do with kids, and there's one in typically ones that I would like to promote, that is called CATS, CATS, and that is a free self-test, and it's available online. It's available in Polish, in many other languages, and you don't have to be a psychologist to use it. You can use it to see, okay, so how is the level of trauma symptoms here, and do we need to connect with child psychiatry or help this kid get into treatment, which could be very helpful. Okay, so if you look about trauma, it's a big area, and the common treatment, I haven't put up a picture on that, but the usual treatment that you get if you go into treatment is trauma-focused CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That is the treatment that is the most spread over the world, and also the treatment that has shown in research that it's the most evidence-based treatment. I'm a TF-CBT trainer, so I've actually trained people in Poland on this. And so that is what you can use when you have a kid that actually needs trauma treatment. But if you have kids that have, for example, developmental trauma, that have lived in a, their upbringing have been full of traumatic events, but they have more unspecified symptoms. What we talk about then is at least start using and applying trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care is to make the context where the kids are as predictable, as safe, as easy to understand, and still individualized to every single child. So how can we build our organizations to be sensitive to treating kids with trauma? So if we can help kids stabilize by, making sure that they're in a safe environment where they don't get bullied and where not new trauma events happens, that they understand, okay, the setting they're in, why am I here and how does this work? That we have adults around them that understand what trauma symptoms is, so that they can individualize their approach. All of these things matters a lot, because usually when you give the psychoeducation, and if you can give this stabilization around the kids, the trauma symptoms go down, and you will find that it is easier to actually reach the kids and do any interventions with them. Because if you have kids that are full in flight, fight, or freeze mode, you won't be able to teach them much. You won't be able to help them manage their own anxiety, because they need to handle this first. Then they can teach and learn new things. So this is something I really recommend you looking into. If you search for trauma-informed care online, there's so many resources, and there's so much help that you can, implement in any kind of setting. Doesn't matter if it's a school or a residential, or if it's an outpatient clinic. This works in every setting. And it's not always easy, because we all have our different way of handling things, but when we start to talk about validation and we talk about this approach, you will notice that you will get the response from the kids that you might didn't get before. You will notice that they are easier to talk to, that they're more willing, they get more motivated, and also less scared from their own symptoms. And that's really where we need to get them to be able to understand, okay, so does this kid need treatment, or can we just work on this stabilization around them, and that's good enough? So I really recommend you trying to look into this and see if you can learn more about this and implement in your settings, or maybe you already have, I don't know. If you don't, I really recommend you doing it. If you have, congratulations. It's a really good way of working. So back to children with sexual harmful behavior. When you look at the smaller kids, and the smaller kids is actually, if you look in research, we don't have as much research on the population, but with small kids, we actually do have treatment forms that are clearly effectful, and it's all because of this woman, Barbara Bonner. She's from Oklahoma City in the US, and she started working with kids and sexual harmful behaviors like in the 80s, 90s. And she developed this treatment module that I will talk about later. And they also, her and a colleague of hers, they wrote this definition around children with sexual harmful behavior that I feel is very helpful, because it helps you see what this is and how you need to separate this from adults. So they say that sexual behavior problems is not represent a medical or psychological syndrome or a specific diagnosable disorder, but rather a set of behaviors that fall outside acceptable societal limits. Children with SBP are children ages 12 and younger who initiate behaviors involving sexual body parts, genitals, anus, buttocks, and breasts that are developmentally inappropriate or potentially harmful to themselves or others. Although the term sexual is used, the intentions and motivations for these behaviors may or may not be related to sexual gratification or sexual stimulation. The behaviors may be related to curiosity, anxiety, imitation, attention-seeking, self-calming, or other reasons. SBP may include behaviors that are entirely self-focused or behaviors that involve other children. Behaviors involving other children may vary in the degree of mutuality or coercion, the types of sexual acts, and the potential for harm. And I think it summarizes what sexual harmful behavior is with small children, or sexual problematic behaviors, whatever you call it. Because again, it's something that kids have with them, and then it becomes a behavior that is outside of the norm. And when it's outside of the norm, it is when it's inappropriate, problematic, abusive, or violent, because we still have this normal sexual behavior that is on this side. So this is a model by Simon Hackett, and he is a really good researcher that's done a lot of research on this area, and he will actually publish a new version of this that I think it's even better, but I'm not allowed to share it yet, sadly. I will as soon as I can, because that will also be a free material of how you can think when you assess children with sexual harmful behavior. Because you need to look at both, okay, the age of the child, the developmental age of the child, the context this happens, the family context, and then you have to take all of those components and put them together to understand, okay, so what is this behavior? Because for some kids, it's the behavior they've learned. For some kids, it's because they're curious. For some kids, it's because they are trying to manage their anxiety. There are so many different ways and so many different kinds of sexual abuse that we need to take all of those pieces together to be able to understand how this individual works and how this individual needs help. And I think he does it in a really, really good way. So I hope I will be able to share that with you later. So kids with sexual behavior problems need, and I've been talking a little bit about this, they need protection, first of all, because they need to be protected from not sexually abuse someone else again, but they also need to be protected from being sexually abused, because we know that kids with sexual behavior problems are a group of kids that are more likely to get sexually abused by someone else too, because they have the interest, they might be open for trying things out at the beginning at least, and adult offenders usually can spot these kids pretty easily and then keep on sexually abusing them. So they need protection both for sexually abusing others, but also for not being sexually abused by sexually abused themselves. They need to get the proper assessment. So we need to do an assessment to figure out, okay, so how likely is that this behavior will continue? What kind of needs does this kid have? What do we need to give them in treatment? Do we need to do some group intervention with the whole family or the care system that around this kid? So every kid needs to be looked at individually so that we know, okay, so how do we handle this and how do we work from here? They need the education about private body rules and boundaries. They need the age-appropriate sexual education, and then an age-appropriate evidence-based treatment. And treatment for kids include parents. So here we also need to talk about and talk to the parents. We need to involve parents, even if it's foster parents or if it's residential staff, they need to be part of this treatment so that they can support and help the child with outside the treatment sessions. Because yes, we will teach them things in session, but they need to practice these things outside of session to be able to actually learn how to do them in real life. And that is super important. All treatment for sexual harmful behavior needs to be skills-based and needs to focus on how do I learn new skills that prevents me from doing this again, from harming someone else or myself. So not only the parents needs help with this, the support system the kids have, so that could be grandparents or aunts and uncles, it could be siblings, it could be the kindergarten, or it could be the school. They all need to get to know how to handle these behaviors so we do it in the same way, because that is what leads to success and to the behavior to end. Okay, bring along. Hope you're still breathing. So adolescents. We can't treat either children and adolescents as adults, and we can't treat children as adolescents or adolescents as children. If we have a low-functioning teenager with a low IQ and with big difficulties, we sometimes actually use the children treatment plan because it's more appropriate, because it targets and helps them understand in a better way than the adolescent treatment does. But when we talk about sexual abuse in general, we talked about hands-off abuse and we talked on hands-on. So hands-off is everything, all kinds of sexual abuse that is not touching someone. And when I started doing these trainings 25 years ago, we almost never had any hands-off. We talked about, people calling and making obscene phone calls. And people showing themselves or their genitals to other people. But now, when I do risk assessment nowadays, it's even more common that the sexual abuse has been online than in real life, because many kids, they have pretty rich sexual life online, both with sending pictures, but also forcing other kids to show their genitals or do sexual things on camera, and then they record it and spread it. So you always have to ask about both behaviors when you do assessment around sexual behaviors. Hands-on is, of course, everything where you touch someone else. It's everything from, actually having intercourse with the victim to touching the victim. Like frottage is like when you rub yourself up against someone on the bus or on a train. It's not very common in my town, but when I went to Tokyo, there were actually carriers on the train that were carts that only was for women, because it was such a common problem, especially during the rush hours, that people got molested on the trains, that there were trains between 4 and 6 that were only for women. And so everything, sexual abuse is everything that is not wanted by another person. So it's always the victim's experience of what happened. And this, I mean, you all know, how hard it is sometimes to convict when it's been sexual abuse, because it's word against the word. But when we do risk assessment, we always go on the victim's story. So the same for adolescents. When we have a problem and when we get to know about a child that have sexually coerced someone else in any way, either if it's online or in real life, they also need protection. They need protection from being able to harm someone else again, and they need protection from being harmed themselves. And this means that if we have kids with sexual behavior problems, we need to have someone watching them when they are with other kids and children, because they shouldn't be spending time with other kids and children alone until we know it's safe. And that means until they have gone through treatment, so we know that they can be safe and that they have the skills to be safe. This could sometimes be a problem in residential care, where you mix kids that are victims and kids that have sexual behavior problems. And that is super important to make sure that these kids are monitored all the time, so that this can't happen in residential care. I know that it's sadly not uncommon that both sexual abuse and violence happens in residential care. But we as an adults have to keep working on this to be able to make this environment safe for kids, so that they can both stop behavior, but also start to feel safe, so that they can learn and actually adapt and learn new skills and behaviors. And as for the kids, they need treatment that is based on their risk, and they need their parents or their network to be active in the treatment, and they need to get support from the school too. So always invite the whole system when you do treatment with these kids. Oops, nope, it doesn't want to. Here. So when you talk about all kinds of treatment, you should make sure that it's based in the risk, need, and responsivity principle. And the risk, need, responsivity principle is created by Andrews and Bonta, and that was also late 1900s. And this works across the whole line from criminal behaviors to sexual behaviors. And it talks about, first you need to look at, okay, so what are the level of risk of these kids? So what is the risk that they will do this again? And we need to do a risk assessment to do that. So we need to, determine the risk of this youth doing this again. We would say that it's moderate. So the risk is moderate, and then we need to look at, what are the needs of this specific individual? What do they need to be able to go into treatment? Well, they might need a very safe surrounding where they're safe from not committing new offenses, not abusing someone else. They might need help from their family or their school or other caregivers or adults to be able to actually go through treatment. So what support system do we need? And how can we then, in responsivity, how can we adapt this treatment? How can we make this treatment interventions in a way that that this specific teenager can feel motivated and actually learn the skills that we want to teach them? So we, as the therapists or the teachers or the surrounding network, we need to make sure that we understand, okay, so what is going on with this kid and how can we help him, which is usually his, to be motivated and actually want to learn this thing. Because as we all know, we can't force treatment on anyone. If someone really don't want to, it doesn't matter how much we talk to them, they won't change anyways. We must find ways to build that motivation within this teenager or this child to be able to help them, or the parents for that matter. And with that, I'm not saying that we only should do things that they want to do. I mean, the program is pretty clear. We need to talk about sexuality. We need to talk about the laws and rules. We need to talk about consent. We need to figure out, okay, how did this abusive behavior function for you? All of those things we need to do. But I, as a therapist, I can, adapt how I talk, what activities we do, and how we talk about this from the ways that the individual I have in the room needs. So I make sure that I not just work from a manual that is, first session we do this. I try to get to know this person first, and then I make sure to adapt the treatment. Okay, so this way I think I can get him on board so that we actually can work about this. And in this part, it's really important to figure out, okay, is this a kid that also needed trauma treatment? Because sometimes you need to do the trauma treatment first before you can go in to do the treatment for sexual abusive behavior, because if they have a lot of trauma symptoms that disturb all the time, they will have a really hard time learning what we want to teach them in the treatment. So risk assessment. There are pretty much these two that are the major ones that we use for adolescents. It's the eraser and J-SOAP. In Sweden, we use the eraser, and pretty much in all of Scandinavia, because it's the one that has been translated, and they are both equal in research, equally good. So what you do when you do a risk assessment is that you have a checklist of risk factors, that you interview the child and you interview the parents and you interview anyone else that is supporting around the kids. And then you look into, okay, so how many of these risk factors do they have? And then you assess them being in low, moderate, or high risk for reoffense. You really need to practice this a lot because it's not easy to. You have to have a pretty good basic knowledge around how sexual abuse works and how sexual abuse in teenagers work to be able to do this, because it's a structured clinical assessment. So even if I have these risk factors, I as a clinician has to, do the math myself. It's not like I can't count. There's 4 present, so then it means it's low. I do the assembling of these risk factors and do and categorize it into low, moderate, or high. So you need to have a pretty good understanding of how sexual abuse works before you can be able to do the eraser. As I talked about before, recidivism is low. For children, it's really, really low. For adolescents, it's also very low, especially if they have gotten some kind of treatment. It's average around 4.9, but it could be as low as 2. For girls, it's even lower. It's around 1%. Why that is, we have no idea, but we know that most kids that sexual abuse won't become adult sexual offenders, because the sexual abuse in your teenage years or when you're young, it's about other things, usually about curiosity, usually about wanting to try being sexual and then trying maybe with someone that didn't want to, or maybe with a smaller sibling or cousin. You have a hard time controlling your sexual emotions, so they leak out in one or another way. And now with the internet and all the connections online, it's so easy to do something that you shouldn't do online too. So most of the kids do not recidivate. Okay.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
So this was a video or way of talking about body rules that was all over the TikTok for a while. And you know, when you talk with kids and when you do treatment with kids and parents for that matter, but mostly with kids, you need to make treatment fun, and you need to make treatment interactive, and you need to make treatment interesting. So using all kinds of media, video clips, games, activities, to make it fun and engaging. You can still be very serious. You can still talk about the serious things. You can still, you know, teach them everything they need to know, but you can make it in a way that gives them, you know, that little glimpse of interest. So it's not, you know, you just having a monologue talking about this is how it needs to be. I know that many kids that when I meet them for the first time, I usually meet them for the first time when they do the risk assessment, and then later on I might have them in treatment. And many kids are so scared when they come because they think I will just yell at them and, you know, be stern and talk to them like, you know, some sort of a police officer. And I mean, that is not what I do, because I know that that won't work. We know that a punitive style won't work. We need to get the kids engaged and to understand the consequences of their behavior, what that would lead to in the long run. And to be able to do that, we need to get them engaged and motivated.
No touching, no touching. No touching, no touching. No touching. No touching. No touching. No touching.
No touching! No touching!
No touching. No touching. No touching. No touching. No touching. No touching. No touching.
I think this video is hilarious because I have been talking about this for so many years, about how do we teach kids new skills and way to handle themselves. And then COVID hit and no one, not even us adults, knew how to handle this new situation. Suddenly, we're not allowed to do what we know how to do, and we're in all these weird situations where we're so used to walking up to someone and shake their hand or do the cheek kissing or whatever kind of, you know, hello you do in your country, and suddenly we were supposed to fist bump or an air high five, and sometimes even kick each other on the foot, like all these stupid little things. And it's for so many years I've been talking about, we need to help kids to understand what to actually do. And we need to do it in a very concrete way, because just talking about what to do, it doesn't teach us. We talked so much about not touching, and still we just ended up doing whatever we usually do. I mean, I don't know how long it took for you, but it took quite a long time for most people to, you know, not touch and not touch the rails and touch everything. We're so used to touch everything. So when you talk about treatment, you need the treatment to be very concrete. You have to practice. And that means not only talking about it, you need to practice in the room, you need to role play, you need help kids if you're in residential settings, for example, you're in the perfect place, but you can work on skills the whole time, like 24 hours a day, because when you're engaging with other people, that's when you can say, good job, I saw that you were so kind to that boy, that's a really good job, that's what I want to see more of. Or you can correct behavior, did you see that the other staff didn't really want to do that game with you? Do you understand why? No, I don't know. Well, you were kind of, a little rude to her before, and you were a little demanding. Could that be why she didn't want to do that game with you? Maybe. So could you try to ask her in this way instead and see if that is different? So if you have kids that have a hard time with relationship skills, you need to practice and you need to make this concrete. So the treatment foundation we work from is CBT, mostly cognitive behavioral therapy, because we know that this is something that needs to be practical, and we know that this is how we can help kids understand and change their behavior. We also know that treatment with kids and adolescents, and this is all kind of treatment, not only with children with sexual harmful behavior, needs to be multi-systemic. So we need to work with the families, the foster families, the residentials, the teachers. We need to have everybody on board and try to make it as foolproof as possible. So make people do it the same thing and helping the kid in the same way, because if we can do that, we are most likely going to succeed in helping them never to do these behaviors again. But if we can't organize ourselves, how is the kid then going to know if there's different rules in one place at home and other rules in school and other rules when I'm in my free time and other rules in the residential? So we need to help to, surround the kids with the same rules so that they can understand and that they can practice and practice and practice, and people around them say the same things and help in that way. Okay. This might take a little longer. I don't know where we started really, but hopefully you're still with me.
Hi, guys. Where are you off to?
Auntie Taryn wants milk from the shop.
Mom says when my grandma was little, she lived on a farm, and they got their milk fresh from the cow every day.
Yeah. Fifi, I've been wondering, was my mom alive when Grandma Linda was little?
No. So, how did I get here? I know I came out of my mommy's body, but how did I get there in the first place?
So, JJ, I think you're asking how you were made. Well, I have something amazing to tell you. Your mom and dad made you.
Really? How?
Most people have the ability to reproduce. That word means to create new life. Like cows make new calves, and humans can make new humans.
Oh, but how exactly?
Inside most dads, there are really tiny cells called sperm, and moms have something different inside their bodies, tiny eggs. When just one of dad's sperm joined an egg from your mom, they travel together to your mom's uterus. That's how you got started. Imagine you grew and grew in your mom's uterus until you were born.
Fifi, how much did I weigh when I came out?
A healthy 7.5 pounds. And Freddie, you were almost 9 pounds. Now look at you both.
And how did the sperm and egg get together?
Well, a penis and a vagina fit together, like two puzzle pieces.
Okay, I think I get it, but what about the sperm and the egg part?
Well, when the penis is inside the vagina, sperm can come out of an opening at its tip. Then they swim real fast up to a tube in the woman's body where there might be an egg for them to join.
That's how I got started?
Right. When your dad's sperm joined your mom's egg, they created one brand new cell. That one cell made more cells, and then they traveled down to stick inside your mom's uterus, where they grew and grew into you and you.
Wow! That is cool! Race you all back to my house!
Bye!
So another little cute video from that site, Amaze. They have a ton of different subjects, not only how babies are made, that could be very helpful when you do treatment if you have kids that can talk or at least understand English. I'm sure there are children shows and other things that in Polish that you also can find and use. But I feel like it's a very good way, and then you don't have to talk so much about it. You can draw on the whiteboard, and then the kids can discuss by themselves, and you can get a lot of help from these little videos of how you can approach and talk about this. So when we talk about the treatment that is around for smaller kids, it's actually a group treatment program. You can absolutely do it individual too, but I would say I've done it both individual and in group. Individual only when I didn't have enough kids in the same age group, so I had to do it individual. I feel like doing it in group is way more efficient, because when you're in group, it becomes more fun, and you can also use the group to do role plays and practice skills in a way, and it's good for kids to know that they're not alone, and that there are more kids that actually have the same problem. Even if we don't talk in detail about what they have done, we talk about how it can feel, and they can hear other kids saying that. And also what we do in this program, we have parents in one group and we have children in one group. So parents are also in a group with other parents to other kids with sexual behavior problems. And that we have found is also very helpful, because these parents, they are often very shameful. They feel like they are pointed out as sexual maniacs or offenders. And some kids has absolutely been through sexual abuse at home, but some kids hasn't. And some kids, we don't know why they have a sexual behavior problem. So these parents usually need a lot of support too. So they work in one group around parenting skills, and then also talking about the same themes that we do in the child group, so that they can, when they're home, talk with their children about the same things and remind them about the skills they're learning. And then children and parents get homework together that they do at home between the sessions. So for children, we talk about private parts, private areas. We talk about body rules and boundaries that I've talked a lot about already. We practice relaxation techniques. So what can I do when I feel this little tingle coming? What can I do to manage my impulse and manage my body? So talk about, both relaxation techniques to be able to handle my impulse and my whatever I feel, but also simple stop technique. So how do I just stand still, stop, and think about what I want to do, decide if it's a good thing or bad thing. If it's a bad thing, okay, I need to figure out something else, and then decide what to do or ask for help. So the turtle here is a tool we use to describe that stop technique. So because if you're a turtle and you don't know what to do, or if you get scared, you pull your head into your shell. So when you feel like you're about to do something that you don't know is if it's okay or not, you're supposed to tell yourself stop and think that you pull yourself into the shell. And in the shell, you're supposed to take a deep breath or do something else that we talked and learned how to relax our body. And then think about, okay, so is this a thing I should do or should not do? If I don't know if it's okay or not, what can I do then? Yeah, maybe I can ask. Okay, so then I pull my head out of the shell and ask if this is okay. Or if I know that it's not okay, but it will be hard to not do it if I stay in the situation, maybe I can go and ask my parents if I could help with dinner or help do laundry or just watch TV or something else. So very simple, but very effective. The body rules are like this. So the body rules you can adapt to the child you have in the group, because that could be different if there's something specific that we want them to know that they can't do. I've had a couple of kids, for example, that couldn't help. They like wherever they were, they went up to people they didn't know and asked really intimate sexual questions. So then that had to be on the body rules too. So you can adapt this a little bit. This is like a main, more general body rule. So it's okay to touch your own private parts when you're alone, but you have to be in your room or in a locked bathroom. It can't be when someone else comes in. We know it feels good to touch your body parts, but it's not okay to do it when you're with someone else. And you have to take care of it. You have to wash your hands after and all of that. It's not okay to touch others' private parts. It's not okay for others to touch your private parts. It's not okay to show your private parts for other people. And that could be tricky, right? Because if you're in the swim house, or if you're in a changing room after you play sports, then you might have to take your clothes off and shower. So is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. As long as you don't ask someone else or you show someone else that don't want to see you. If you're a changing room and everybody does the same, the important part there is that you do your business and don't look at someone else, right? And don't stare at someone else or ask to touch someone else. Or you do your business, you take your clothes off, you shower, you wash yourself, you put clothes on again, and that's it. It's not okay to take photos of other private parts, and not okay to send someone pictures of your private parts. So here you can add and take off and add on whatever you find you need to do for this particular child. Okay. We're almost at the end. Hope you're still alive.
Hugging is the most intimate interaction any two humans can have, regardless of how long ago they met. Here's how to get the most out of your first time. Initiating the hug. First, to figure out whether you're actually going to hug or not, hold your arms out and cock your head to the side in a manner that says, "We're doing this thing, right?" Getting into the hug. Now that you know a hug is going to happen, head towards the person with your head tipped back. This is a non-threatening posture and shows the other person where their shoulder should go. Hand placement. When placing your hands on another person's body, you don't want to go too low or too high. Too low says, "Hey there." Too high, "It's been too long." Neither of which is appropriate for a first hug. How hard to hug. Another tricky balancing act, you don't want to hug too tightly. Remember that your nipples and genitalia are aligned, and interactions in these areas should be reserved for later hugs. Talking while in the hug. Try restating the purpose of the hug. If it's a goodbye hug, say something like, "It was good seeing you. We should do this again soon." Don't comment on the quality of the hug, the feeling of your hugging partner's garments, or the scent of their hair. This is a good hug. Is that coconut? Rubbing or patting of the back. Give firm pats on the person's shoulders, reassuring them that what is happening is okay. Don't pat their back condescendingly with the heel of your palm. This tells the other person that you resent them for initiating the hug. Length of hug. Science tells us that a hug should last at least 20 seconds for endorphins to kick in and make us feel good. But a first hug isn't about feeling good. It's about gently squishing a stranger against yourself, giving you something uncomfortable to bond over. And that's your basic first hug. If done correctly, both parties should be riding a wave of relief that such a strange and uncomfortable custom passed so fairly.
So remember I talked about being concrete when it comes to treatment. This is how concrete you need to be sometimes with teenagers, especially if you have teenagers that have some sort of neuropsychiatric disorders or maybe weaker IQ. But even with regular teenagers, because sometimes this is not something that you learn. And if we think about it, how do we learn what to do at the right moment? It's pretty unclear, and it's a very gray area. We watch things, we talk to people, we try things. And if you have any kind of other problems like trauma symptoms or neuropsychiatric disorders or any other psychiatric disorders, these are things that doesn't always come natural to you. And if you on top of that have had maybe an upbringing and parents that didn't know how to do this and didn't maybe even have the strength or the possibility to teach you these things, then it's really, really hard to know what to do on all occasions. So when we talk about treatment with adolescents, we use a CBT base. I'm also a DBT trainer, so dialectical behavioral therapy. So I use a lot of components from that, which means that I use a skills-based treatment that focuses on mindfulness, emotional regulation, and relationship skills most of all. And we know that the more relationship skills we can teach a teenager or a child for that matter, the less situations they will come into where they actually need to use emotional regulation skills. Because if you know how to do things, if you know and feel secure in your relationships, you won't end up in situations that are that hard anymore, because you know and you can feel confident with yourself that you know what to do. It's when you don't know what to do, when you feel anxious and you feel insecure, that's when your emotions go wild and you end up in situations where you might not handle it. So we focus on this, and we focus on it being so concrete we possibly can. So I have one last video I want to show you, and then I'm finally at the end. So when we talk about teenagers, I talked about this before, it's so important with kids too, for that matter. It's so important to talk about, laws and rules, but also about consent, because consent is, the foundation of all of this, and the foundation you have to build on in all the relationships. It's not only in sexual relationships, it's in all relationships. I need to always make sure that the people around me are with me and not, just doing things to make me happy or just doing things because they think they have to. I always have to make sure that when I'm in any relationship, it doesn't matter if it's a sexual relationship or if it's a friend relationships or it's a relationship with your parents, you have to make sure that you're kind and that you're thoughtful and that you have consent when you do things.
It's really important to understand what giving sexual consent actually means, emotionally and physically.
And knowing what laws are here to help protect you and keep you safe.
Imagine asking your partner to have sex is like asking to use their mobile phone.
Can I use your phone? What might they say?
You'd think that there was only two answers, right? Yes or no.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. But first, let's deal with the simple part. So, can I use your phone?
No.
That's pretty easy to understand. They don't want you to use their phone. You might feel a little bit upset that they don't want you to use their phone just now or anytime soon.
But worse things have happened. You'll just have to wait until they're ready to let you use their phone. And you shouldn't pressurize someone into letting you use it. Give me your phone.
No.
But if they say...
Yeah.
This is where things get a bit more complicated.
They might say...
Sure, you can use my phone to make a call.
But this might come with conditions like...
You can only use it if it's to make a short call.
Can I send a text message?
Or look at your photos.
Or show your photos to my mates.
Doesn't mean you can use their phone whenever you want, without asking.
Giving you permission to use their phone for a quick call does not mean you can use their phone however you want or whenever you want. And sexual consent is exactly the same.
So if somebody says yes to something like a kiss, this doesn't mean they're saying yes to anything else.
And having sex once does not mean you can demand sex again, whenever you want, without asking.
And if your partner can't give you an answer for any reason, this never means yes.
And not saying no does not mean yes. You wouldn't just take someone's phone if they hadn't said yes, would you? Hey!
So when you think of it like that, there are similarities between asking to have sex and asking to use someone's phone. And the best way to understand what your partner is happy with is to talk about it.
It might feel a little bit awkward at first. She might get excited or nervous or worried.
But it does get easier. And remember, not as many people are doing it as you might think.
It is so much better when you both know what you think. Remember, when someone asks you, it's up to you.
So, make sure to teach kids about body rules, about private parts, about consent. And that is kind of the basics that we can do. And then if you also focus on teaching them relationship skills, you're going to have quite more happy kids and adolescents. And the risk of them actually ending up in situations where they either get abused or abuse someone else will be way, way, way less. So thank you.